Bon dia. Unfortunately, those are the last words that you will hear of your beautiful language from me. I speak restaurant Portuguese, and that's all. Pastéis de nata, bacalhau, you know. Most of you are young people in this audience, and you're part of a generation that I've described as the net generation. You're the first generation to come of age in the digital age, and you're different than your parents. Your brains are different. You think differently, you learn differently, and you're a powerful force to change the world. You're the first generation of digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. I had to learn the language. And you have no fear of technology because it's not there. It's like the air for you. It's like I have no fear of a refrigerator. Now, normally, I talk to audiences about your generation, but you would find that boring. So instead, I'm going to talk to you about what I think your generation needs to do. And in particular, I'm going to raise an idea that given the huge complexity of this digital world that you're going into and the massive challenges for transformation, that each of you needs to apply design thinking to actually designing your life rather than just letting your life happen to you. Anyone who's tweeting, by the way, I'm at Tapscott on Twitter. Now, I'd like to begin with a story. I was invited by a large university in Florida to spend a very long lunch with the deans and the management of the university. And the university was attempting to become the first 21st century university, and they wanted to pick my brain to see what I thought that looked like. So I told them, I think the university of the future will have a very different model of pedagogy, that the lecture is a one-way, one-size-fits-all, teacher-focused model, and that we need to move towards a collaborative model focused on students. It's customized to individual students, and where students are not isolated in the learning process. And I said, secondly, I think that we need to change the way the courseware and content is developed for universities. How bizarre is it that in the world there are 20,000 statistics professors, and every one of them is developing their own little notes and PowerPoints and tests and software to explain what an analysis of variance is. They should be cooperating together. We need to break down the walls of the ivory tower. Well, what happened was there were about 20 people sitting around this big table, and they said, that's very interesting. And they turned to someone in the room, a guy named Joe. And Joe was a 22-year-old student in his fourth year. And one of the deans said to Joe, well, you're our one student here, Joe. Why don't you tell us what you think? And so Joe says, well, I've been listening to Professor Tapscott's presentation, and it's resonating with me. Because thinking about it, I think that my generation does learn differently. I'll give you an example. I don't read books. And the look in the room was sort of the look in this room, right? He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, he says, I think I'm knowledgeable, so he's sort of saying he knows what's in books, but I don't read books. If I need some information, I go to the internet to get that. And if I need to know what's in a book, I can go to Google Books and get one chapter of a book for free, and I'm good at figuring out what's the right chapter. And he says, if I have to read a physical book, I don't read it like a book. You know, he's sort of saying he doesn't follow the narrative of the book. He's in the index and the table of contents, and he's out on the web, and he's back into the book. He says, I don't read books. So the dean of the film school was sitting beside me, and he said to Joe, well, Joe, thank you very much. I don't know if that's interesting and exciting, what you said, or if it means the end of civilization. So this amazing discussion happens, and I'm very pleased with it. They're questioning all kinds of fundamental things about the model of pedagogy, the nature of the university. And after 3 hours, it breaks up. So I went to Joe and I said, I'd like to get to know you. And he said, well, I can't. I'm flying to Fort Lauderdale right away. I have to leave right away. And I had a private plane that they'd given me for the day. So I said, well, here, you just come with me and we'll fly together. So we get in the plane and I start to interview him. And I said, so Joe, tell me about yourself. He says, what do you want to know? I said, well, what kind of student are you? He says, I'm a good student. I've always had A's. Gather he's got a 4.0 grade average. I said, what else do you do at the university? He says, well, I'm the president of the Students' Council, and I have been for 2 years. I have a $12 million budget. I'm on 18 committees, and I chair 9 of the committees. So that takes some time. I'm sure it does. I said, do you do anything else? He says, the normal athletic stuff. He says, the big thing was my girlfriend is from New Orleans, and when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, we went down to the city to see what we could do. And there was no healthcare clinic in the devastated 9th Ward, so I set one up. I said, you set up a healthcare clinic? And he says, yeah, you have the internet, you can do anything you want to do. You need an air conditioner, you can get an air conditioner. I said, that's amazing. Is it still functioning? And he said, yeah, it sees 9,000 patients a year. It's called the 9th Ward Healthcare Clinic. I said, wow. Doesn't read books. I said, tell me about your parents. And he sighed. He said, it's a tough topic because last year both of my parents died. One was in an accident, the other was sick. I said, oh, geez, I'm so sorry. I said, do you have siblings? And he said, yes, I do, and I'm the eldest, so it's my job to keep the family together. I said, well, do they live here in the same city? And he said, no, they don't. And I said, well, how do you keep the family together? He says, well, we're on the internet all day long. We're on Facebook, we're texting. He said, you know the best thing I found out? We created a family guild on World of Warcraft. And we go and slay dragons together as a family. It's fantastic. I said, wow, what are you doing next year? He says, well, I'm going to London. I'm going to study and do a master's degree. And I said, that's great. And he says, I'm really excited because I'm going to get the British healthcare system. He said, we never went to a doctor when we were kids. He knows all about the British healthcare system. He knows about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He knows about Ronald Coase's theory of the firm. He doesn't read books. But he's as knowledgeable as anybody I've met. I said, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm going to Oxford, taking a master's in philosophy. Oxford and Cambridge would be the 2 hardest places in the world to get into. I said, wow, that's incredible. Did you get any financial aid? Because I knew he was poor. And he said, yeah, it's great. I have a scholarship. It covers everything. I said, fantastic. Where did that come from? He said, well, it's called a Rhodes Scholarship. A Rhodes Scholarship is the most prestigious scholarship in the world. Bill Clinton is a Rhodes Scholar. The Rhodes Scholar from Florida 3 years ago doesn't read books. Bob Dylan, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. There's a fundamental change that's happening. We're moving into a new age of network intelligence where the traditional media, print and then radio, television, broadcast, it was all one way, one size fits all, you push it out, and people out there are passive recipients. We're moving into an age of networked intelligence. Now in this world, you're the first digital natives, but you need to learn how to design your life. And I have to give full credit here. I've been collaborating on this idea. I've never given a speech about this before, but I've been collaborating on this idea with someone named Neste Tapscott, who's my daughter. And she's an enormously successful person who's 28 years old. And when I was a kid, my parents didn't need to design anything. My dad came home. There was no, should I check email or talk to Donnie? There was no email. There were 3 television stations. There were no Blackberries at the kitchen table. We got our values in the church. There was no porn in our house. I mean, I probably could have bought a Playboy at the local store, but the shopkeeper would have called up my mother and told her. But now, Nikki is arguing that we need to apply design thinking, which is about being creative, about understanding the context of your life, and about using deep analysis to figure out. Now, this is not about planning your whole life. You can't do that, as your life will evolve and change, but designing some principles. So, 7 of them. I'm going to go through them very quickly, each in half a minute. There's a guy named Nicholas Carr who's written a book that says Google is making us stupid. That it's called The Shallows, what the internet is doing to our brains. That we don't think deeply anymore. We're just dancing around in tiny little surface stuff. Well, we know about brain plasticity. In London, taxi drivers have a bigger part of the brain that's responsible for memory than bus drivers, because taxi drivers have to remember all these streets. Your brain is a result of how you spend your time. So, what does this mean for the digital age? You know, Albert Einstein was interviewed once, and after the interview, the journalist said, "Could I follow up with a call?" And he said, "Sure." And she said, "Can I have your phone number?" And he said, "Great." He pulled out a phone book and started looking up his number. She said, "You're the smartest man in the world. You don't know your own phone number?" And he said, I only remember things that I can't look up." Now, what do you want to store off-board, and what do you want to store in main memory? Should you be reading a full article every day, even though you don't think that you need to? What is your design strategy for your brain and for your media diet? Don't let media happen to you. Design it. You need to design your knowledge base. You know, when I was a kid, you graduated, you were set for life. Well, when you graduate, you won't be set for life. You'll be set for 15 minutes. And if you took a technical course, half of what you learned in the first year is obsolete by the time you get to the 4th year. So you need to build a strategy for lifelong learning, because you're going to reinvent your knowledge base multiple times as you go throughout your life. What's your strategy to inform yourself? With the breakdown of all the media, we had the newspaper every day. Will we all end up following only our own little points of view at where we're in these little self-reinforcing echo chambers, and the purpose of information is not to inform us, but is to give us comfort? You need to design that. How about your career? You know, in the United States, the vast majority of teenage boys want to be athletes, and teenage girls want to be actors. Well, I hate to say it, that ain't going to happen. And we need science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. On the other hand, we do need strong liberal arts, because we need people to be able to think as well. Now, you have a big opportunity that never existed before. When I graduated, you went and worked for a company. Today, little companies can have all the capability of big companies without the main liabilities: legacy culture, systems, and people. So we need to think through what are our vocational opportunities. You can now be an entrepreneur. You can work for an NGO. You need to design your health and do that in a conscious way. You're part of the first generation that can live a healthy and productive life over 100 years. You need to design your location. Richard Florida, a friend of mine, says that the place that you choose to live will be the single most important decision in your life. You need to design your family. This is from an old soap opera in Brazil. But you're the first generation that will have children where you understand the technology. My generation's done a terrible job putting blocking software on kids' computers and mistrusting our children and fearing what we don't understand. You're the first generation that has an opportunity to do a social contract with your children. You need to design your strategy to change the world. And we have today a broken world. And when you look at the Arab Spring, your generation is bringing down tyrants around the world. And I'm not suggesting you all become revolutionaries, but in your place of work, in your family, in your community, you can live a principled life of consequence. But to do that, you need to design it. Do I have time to do that video? Okay. So I'd like to end just with a thought. If we could bring the volume down a little bit. So, towards the end of my most recent book, Anthony Williams and I were wondering what an age of networked intelligence might look like. And we started studying various species. And starlings come in something called a murmuration. And throughout the winter months over the moors of England, the starlings are out over a 20-mile radius, and they're foraging for food and doing what starlings do. And at night they come together and they create one of the most spectacular things in all of nature. And the murmuration has a function. It protects the birds. You can see on the right here, there's a hawk, a predator that's being chased away by the collective power of the birds. Now, scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. There's leadership, but there's no one leader. And this collaboration is a collaboration that is designed by nature to be effective. And when the moment is right, the spectacular thing happens. Now, is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or could we learn something from this when you think about your own lives? Well, this murmuration is functioning according to a set of principles. And I'm arguing to you today that you need to think back and decide, what are the principles for my life? This thing is based on a principle of collaboration and on integrity that gives the birds great courage. There's a sharing of information, the location of the birds, and a sharing of knowledge. There's a huge intentionality. This is not just happening to the birds. They're doing something, and collectively they're taking control. There's an interdependence where the birds understand that their individual interests are linked to the interests of others. And together, they're able to do great things. Well, I look at those kids today in the streets of Syria who are being shot by snipers, and the kids in Tunisia and Egypt that brought down tyrants. And I see something that looks very similar to this. You know, in Egypt, many people said that Mubarak will hang in there. He'll be too strong and the kids will go home. But I argued, no, they won't go home, because if they do, he will hunt them down and he will kill them. So, your generation now has unbelievable power at your fingertips. You have the most powerful tool ever for finding out what's going on, for creating wealth, for innovating, for organizing collective responses, and for changing the world. And I'm sorry, but my generation is leaving you with a very troubled world. Apologies on behalf of my generation. Maybe if you can design your lives to be lives that are principled and consequential, and build the collective strength of your generation, then this smaller world that your children inherit might be a better one. Thank you very much.